All right. We are live today, and I have a conversation coming up today with Ed Vargo, co founder and CEO of Burning River Advisory Group. We're talking financial mentorship for women, and we're talking about, generally speaking, women's financial health today. So if you're a lady buzzing around, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love this episode. Um, Feel free, if you're watching this, whether you're on X or if you're on YouTube, to just drop a comment. If you have a comment or question for Ed, I will remind you throughout our conversation to drop your comments if you have one. Um, and I am looking forward to our conversation. Before I bring Ed up on stage, I am going to just remind you that if you're a small business owner, if you're looking to increase your skills with operating and running your business, you should sign up for my Small Business Mastery newsletter, the link to which will be in the description for this podcast. And you'll be able to just sign up. It's free. You don't owe me anything. In fact, I owe you for watching this and listening to this conversation. So I am looking forward to having you sign up and kind of share my thoughts about how business should be run through operations, processes, systems, engineering, pricing, and values, value prop. I want to, we lay it out every Tuesday. There's a new newsletter that goes out. I think you'll enjoy it. Now it's time to get to Ed. Ed, welcome to the Conversation Show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, what led you to start a that primarily focuses on women and women's finances?
Yeah, well, my story starts a little bit earlier than me. It really starts with my mother and the situation she had gone through when I was a child. My mom and my dad, like many relationships, didn't quite work out. They got divorced when I was younger. And as a result of that divorce, my mom had to give up custody of her 4 children. And so it's a little broader than that, than just the financial aspects. My mom's an immigrant from South Korea, first generation, came over, married my dad when they were stationed. He was stationed in South Korea. And so there was a large, not only cultural barrier, but a language barrier. And so my mother never really learned to write the language or read. And then when she got into a divorce situation, she wasn't able to equip herself with the knowledge and information needed to navigate the divorce world effectively. And so in essence, she felt that financially she was not going to be able to care for us kids and wasn't able to negotiate a proper settlement financially for her. And so she literally gave up custody of us children to my father because she didn't think she had any options. And so that's part of the story. It's certainly not a great part of the story, but this idea of this imbalance of power in that relationship led to her to have to give up custody of us 4 children. And then I fast forward to today, I'm the father of 5 daughters. And
Wow.
So, yeah, it's certainly a busy life. They're between the ages of 20 and 26. So I always say I'm a
double wow.
Yeah. So I'm a brave man, maybe not a smart man, but a brave man, 5 daughters in 6.5 years.
Yeah.
But with them, I'm trying to take a different path, of course, and then trying to empower them and teach them and train them, so to speak, in the world of finance and how to navigate that world effectively and use money as a tool to do the things you want to do in your life. And I carry those 2 personal pieces, sort of what my mom went through and what I'm trying to do for my children. I carry that into the business that I'm running with Burning River Advisory Group and Enlighten Her, which is a sister company of ours, and just help women become empowered and be able to use money in the best possible way so they can accomplish the things that they want to accomplish in their lives.
What are we missing? What am I missing about how women deal with finances differently than men? What is it that you observe that maybe I don't, when I'm kind of thinking about this topic?
Yeah, there is a difference. I mean, men and women engage with money very differently. Mm-hmm. And they've done a bunch of studies on why this is. Why do men have a tendency to gravitate toward money more so than women do? Are there structural reasons, psychological reasons, biological reasons for this? Some of it is rooted in biology, believe it or not. In a general level,
I believe it.
Yeah, men tend to gravitate towards things and women tend to gravitate towards people.
Mhm.
That's why you see so many male engineers and you see so many female nurses, right? Women
Yep.
are just naturally inclined. And there's a lot of overlap between those two, don't get me wrong. But if you look at it overall across a broad spectrum of society, that's how it works. And when it comes to money, money is more dominated as a thing. We don't associate money with relationships as directly as we associate it with like what it can do, but the accumulation of money or money as a thing to be managed. And so what happens is let's just say in a relationship, you have husband and wife come together, and then there's a natural division of labor in the household, right? You divide up the chores. I handle X and my wife handles Y. And that makes sense because you don't have to both do all things and you're not equally good at all things. But when it comes to money, men gravitate toward the money more so than the women do. It's just a chore and a task that has to be done. And when that happens with something like money, because of money's unique role in our lives, it is the most powerful tool that we have, maybe the most powerful personal resource we have. When there is when men gravitate toward the money side of things, it can lead to issues down the road if that relationship doesn't work well, or if the husband in this instance maybe isn't doing as well with the money as he thinks he is or she thinks he is. So there's a big disconnect between how men and women engage with money in general.
Yeah, no, to your point, I mean, this has been studied empirically, the gender paradox, which they call it, in Scandinavian countries where those countries have gone the furthest to create an egalitarian society where it's about as flat as you can get it right now. And the Scandinavian countries have some of the largest gender disparities when it comes to career choice, even though they've gone the furthest to create an egalitarian society more than any other country on earth. And I think to your point, it just kind of highlights some of those differences in career choice, which can be the difference in earning potential when you multiply that over time and collecting money. So I definitely believe I believe what you're saying. It's kind of makes a lot of sense. Um, I had somebody on the podcast before that was talking about how we get a lot of our money habits from our parents. Um, did you do you see that as something that is a challenge for some of the people that you've met with, and um, how does that play out in adulthood?
Yeah, absolutely. So we come to our money conversations and our thoughts around money. We have these so-called invisible money scripts
Mhm.
that we've developed over time, right? These thoughts around money that are in our heads, and where did they generate from? When did they come from? A lot of them do generate in our childhood. I see this in my client base. I certainly see it in myself to a certain extent. And it can run the full gamut from quite negative to very positive, depending upon what those money scripts are. So, as an example, I have actually someone on my team who is pretty good with money, and she grew up, but her parents, her father in particular, told her, you need to be a saver. You need to save. You cannot put anything on credit. You can't borrow money. You just need to save, save, save. And so she grew up with that dialogue in her mind. And as she developed and got into the workforce and things of that nature, she was a good saver. She didn't take on any credit card debt. When she went to buy a house, she put a huge down payment. But that's the positive side. Those are good things, but done to an extreme, they become a negative. And so what she was doing is underliving. She was so afraid to spend money that she would be afraid to go out with her friends. She wouldn't. Now I always say, you can go get cheese on that burger. It's okay to pay for the extra cheese on your burger if you want it. But her mindset, which developed again as a child, told her you can't, you shouldn't, when it comes to spending money. And the opposite can be true too. We see a lot of people who were around family members who were spendthrifts. They were spending all the time. That's how they lived money, and they spent it as quickly as they could get it. And they carried that forward into their lives. Debt was a way of life. And so the children grew up with that mindset. And so you don't always follow what your younger or your parents' example. As an example, I grew up opposite of what my father had done. My father was very negative around money and never talked about it in a positive way. He actually assigned negative value of personality traits. So if somebody had money, they must be money hungry. The rich people were bad people because all they cared about was money. And that was his way of dealing with his lack of ability to manage his own money, or a lack of ability to make money. And so I kind of grew up different from that. I grew up with the opposite. Well, I grew up with the more neutral view on money. Like, it wasn't evil, it wasn't good, it was just neutral. I didn't think I was ever going to have any money, so I never placed a whole lot of value on it. But a lot of those thoughts came from my childhood.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're right. I kind of grew up like kind of similar with the more neutral view that it's not about the money or lack of it. It's about who you are, because money is just an amplifier of who you ultimately will become. If you are generous and thoughtful, considerate, polite, those features of yours get amplified because you then have an ability to affect more people when you have more resources. If you are poor and impolite and disrespectful, then even being poor, those features get even more amplified because of the stress of not having money. And at the end of the day, it comes down to kind of what kind of person you are fundamentally, which is why people need to work on themselves, which is a fundamental tenet or aspect. And it's kind of what I hear you saying, to become the person that you ultimately will be, because most of budgeting and having a view of money is really mental strength and having the ability to clearly see kind of what you want out of your own life, which is a hard question for people to answer, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I think you're 100% right. Money is an amplifier. It will enhance whatever you are. If you're a good person with a generous heart, you can do more things. You can be more generous. You can help more people. If you're a selfish person who only cares about him or herself, then you will have all those trappings. You have the big house, the big cars. You will go on these lavish trips, and you will only care about yourself. And that's a negative. So money in itself is neutral, but what we bring the value to it. And I think that's a really important thing. So understanding yourself and who you are is critically important. And it's not to say that money doesn't corrupt, because it certainly can. That's the other side of this. But at the heart of the matter, I approach money as just like any other tool. It's one of the tools in my arsenal. We all have tools in our household, and how you wield that tool is going to determine. It doesn't. You don't look at the tool and assess the tool's value, its worth, based upon its, as an inert instrument. It's what you bring to the table. So again, I think and to your point, if you focus on yourself and if you really understand what's important to you and use your money in alignment with those values, and that's what we believe and we espouse, it's sort of values-based spending, values-based utilization of your dollars. If you can align your dollars with your values, and hopefully your values are good values, then, that's about the best you can do. And then going after money and seeking out money doesn't become a negative. There's a lot of guilt around money. People are afraid to say, like, I want to make a lot of money, because they fear they're going to be judged. And I think that's unfair. I think it's unfair to the person who wants to make more money. And it's unfair to place that sort of negative slant on money, because getting money or having money is not a bad thing at all. And in fact, again, in the right hands, it could be a wonderful thing, because you could do so much good for the world if you have more resources. Just don't be a jerk going after it, right? Don't be a good person when you're seeking out the money. And then if you do that, it should all be fine.
Like anything that you're pursuing with some excess, you have to have the right view of what you're going after. Like you really do, because money is not going to jump into your bank account. It is ink on paper. That's all it is, right? It's a tool. It's a screwdriver in the grand scheme of things. It can help you build. It can help you direct. It can help you live a certain kind of life. But like, you definitely have to work on who you are, for sure. Why are budgets bullcrap, according to your website?
Yeah. Well, the traditional thought around budgets, I don't think they work. That's why. I think they're BS because of it, right? So the idea, the traditional budget is I'm going to line item how much I spend on groceries, on travel, on dining out, on entertainment, on clothing, all those things.
Hmm.
And the problem with that is first of all, to make a budget that's accurate, that's meaningful, you have to know what you're spending in all those categories. I
Right.
mean, do people really know where all their dollars go? And then, first of all, the answer is no. Nobody does. Not really. And it's certainly not
Can we
sustainable.
drill down on that for a minute? I hate to interrupt you in your thought, but why don't people know where their money is going when they're the ones that are spending it? Like, have you been able to? I want to just drill on that for a second. Like, what is that? Like that kind of like thing lives in the spaces of everything else that has to do with money. But are people just ignoring it? Is it more of a comfort thing? Like, what have you found?
I think it's several things, right? So having awareness around where your money goes is critically important, which is very different than having a line item budget. So there's a distinction there. I think your question stems more around the awareness part, like why don't people know or have a reasonable idea where their money goes? I would say that's very true. Most people, generally speaking, don't know where their money goes, much less have a line item budget, which tracks it at a kind of an obnoxious level.
Right.
And part of it is well, you need to have a mechanism for capturing that information. Now, there are plenty of tools out there to go out and capture your spending, but you have to go find them. No one's taught this stuff. No one's taught that says, look, you really should know exactly where your money goes or largely where your money goes. And here's how you go do that. And here's how you do it easily and you do it consistently.
Right.
And because it's hard, it takes time. So what we'll find with budgets and in money awareness in general is that people will do it for a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
They have the motivation, they're ready to go. They're like the willpower. I'm going to figure out where my money goes. And it sounds great, but it's like New Year's resolutions. You start at the beginning of the year. You say, I'm going to do this. You do it for 6 weeks. You're like, I get busy. I forgot. This is boring. All those things that come up, you just revert back to your normal habits. And then you just go back to ignorance is bliss. It's just not an easy thing. It's not a fun thing, and it never ends. The thing about budgets and managing your money, which is part of what makes it so hard, is that it's a never-ending process. You can't just check that box and say, I'm done. I'll come back in 6 months.
So what's the answer to that question? Like, so like it's like the off ramp, right? Like there's no off ramp. I'm gonna have to do this forever. How long am I gonna have to do this? And I'm assuming that's why people, like you said, for short bouts. I'm buying a house. I need to buy a car. My kid needs something. They're going to college, and I need to pay tuition. That's people center their ability to budget and to kind of direct their money around big life events. Or of course, you have 6 months to live, and then they get really good with, in some cases, kind of like honing resources and making sure that everyone's okay. But how does one break the malaise of everyday life in order to actually like see it not as a task, but like brushing their teeth, like a way of being? Yeah.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's hard to make that change, right? To assign the level of value and importance to managing your money is not an easy task, because anything that has staying power requires motivation, resonance, not just motivation, but resonance. It's got to be meaningful to you. That said, let's put that aside for a moment. How do we start down that path to make it simpler and easier so you don't feel like it's an oppressive thing that I have to do all the time? Because if you feel like it's something that's never ending, which like I just said, it is, it's going to be very difficult to engage with it. But can we make that engagement simple and easy and not so time consuming and still effective? And the way we do that is you do this periodically, and you have to do it upfront at least once. And that is, first of all, you got to know what you're starting from a cash flow perspective. How much money am I bringing in every month? You have to start there. And you can average it. If you get paid, 26 times a year, every 2 weeks, just average it per month. And then what I try to get our clients to do, and get people in general to think about, is what are the important things that you need to save for?
Mhm.
So you start with that. So if I let's start with this premise. If I knew that I was saving enough in my 401k plan or my whatever my retirement account is, that my retirement was fine. Like I knew I was saving enough there. Retirement's fine. I knew I have this automatic savings into my regular savings account. So my cash reserve, my emergency fund, that's fine.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the third piece is I have college education and I'm saving into some type of college vehicle. Could be a 529 plan, another savings account, whatever. Point is I'm saving into three places automatically. The rest of my money goes into my checking account. I could spend all that money every month with zero guilt.
Right.
I don't need a budget. I don't need to know. I don't need to monitor every bit of spending I'm doing because I'm saving enough money. My goals are, I have enough money going towards my goals to accomplish them. I could spend money freely throughout the month. And my only job that month is not to spend all my money before the month ends.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. And then, of course, there's an additional benefit to that, I think, that once you do it, just like dieting, which is the sense of accomplishment, right? So, like, once you lose the first 5 pounds, the diet works. Once you start seeing your like savings go in, your retirement increase, like you said, your goals being met, there is a sense of accomplishment on the other side. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. You need some positive motivation. You need something to make it say it's worthwhile. You need some wins along the way. The other thing is when you automate these processes, it takes you out of the equation. You don't have to work that hard at it.
Right.
So why I say budgets are BS, it's because nobody's going to go in there every month and monitor all their spending. They're just not going to do that. But if you set up a structure like I just mentioned, make sure your savings programs are in place. Get that done, automate them. And then the money that's left over in your checking account, your budget is just don't spend all this money before the end of the month. Because if you spend it in 10 days, you've got 20 days of no money. Yeah. That's how it works. And if you spend it in if you have extra every month, fine. That's just a simplified, generic way of thinking about it. But there is no time. It's not time consuming at that point. Right. And if you ran those numbers at the beginning of the month, if you knew you had 5,000 a month that you made an income, you were saving 1,000 a month. That means you could spend 4,000 a month. That's your budget. Right. I have 4,000 a month to live my life. And if I spend it in 20 days, I've got to go 10 days without any spending. And then what happens with the person is they adjust. They know, they figure it out by doing it, not by putting it on paper, because you can't manage a financial life on paper. You've got to go live it.
Is this one of those you should exercise and eat healthy? Like everyone knows that this is what they need to be pursuing, but the actual actions behind it and the way to, like, how do we get people from listening to this podcast to actually doing it? Like, short of us saying that you have 6 months to live or a gun to your head and keeping that gun to your head and be hiring, someone to keep a gun to the people listening to this podcast head until they do it all. Like, how do you create an internal fire?
Well, shoot, if I could, I had to answer that question, I wouldn't be on this podcast, I don't think. I'd be running my own podcast, maybe. I don't know. It's really hard. I mean, at the end of the day, what you're saying to someone is how do you give them enough motivation to get started? I think if you subscribe to what I just said about engage one time up front, right? Run your numbers one time, figure out how much you need to save, put it aside, and then automate the process. Then you don't need to feel like you've got to be in it all the time. It kind of takes care of itself. But so how do you find that motivation the first time to go do it? I mean, that's hard to come by. It really is. I think that there's something internally has got to be powerful enough that says, this is important to me. This money stuff is important to me. And I can't just put my head in the sand. And there's so many reasons for it. Some people are afraid to look under the hood because they're afraid what they're going to find. Right. All their suspicions come true. Like, I know I'm not doing the right things, but if I don't look at it, I don't really know, but if I look at it, I'm going to really know, then I can't hide, So it's that story we tell ourselves to make ourselves, our behavior, our current behavior, okay. So you just have to, I think it's a matter of finding either, if you can't do it internally, start talking to some friends, some family members and ask, don't be afraid to have a conversation around money. I think that's one of the big problems in society is everybody's afraid to talk about money, particularly women. Women are less inclined to engage in money talk than men are. Right. And then when they have the conversation, though, it tends to work out really well. So engage, do a little reading. You don't have to take big steps, take small steps, watch podcasts like this, take one sliver of information from the podcast and say, can I take action on this one piece? And then that will build some momentum and some motivation for the next step.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming, I got to spend, 5 hours going through this. Pick one small thing and start.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's that little thing, man. Don't try to digest the whole cow in one bite, like just bit by bit. Hamburgers first, like turn it into beef patties. So that's good. I mean, I think that's really good advice. And I think that it's important for those who are listening and watching this to take a first step, and oftentimes it's like, man, this is great. I'm going to do this on Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, next year, next month, 6 months from now. Like dudes and dudettes, like just pick a one thing to do today and get it done. I think that's, like signing up for Ed's newsletter on his website, like is something I think that would be great for, the women who are listening to this to engage in. Okay, let's talk about payer systems in families, right? Single payer, two payer system, right? Single payer being everything gets up to a joint account. Two payer system, each individuals have their own checking accounts and then kind of like split the bills and stuff comes in. They do their little NASA reentry coordinate math to understand who owes what. Is there one that's preferable to the other? I'm assuming the answer is going to be it depends on the individuals involved. But this is a podcast where we want to keep people engaged. So it depends is not the right answer here. What's your opinion on single versus two payer? Can they both work? And is there an advantage there?
Well, I'm going to give you it depends answer, but a little more meat on the bone on it. The reality is each method works or can work depending upon the parties at play. And I think regardless, the way I think you can bridge the gap, or if you had to pick one system, right? If I had to make a definitive statement, what I would do is I'd say you can have a joint account for both parties, and then each party has their own individual accounts as well. So the joint account is for household expenses. If you're both contributing dollars toward the mortgage, toward groceries, toward your family travel, to anything that's for the household, you have to have a conversation beforehand, of course, and say, hey, if we're going to be contributing to this bucket equally, and even if it's not equally, let's say one party makes twice as much money, and you agree that person should pay twice as much, whatever that is, fair enough. But you both pay into the same bucket, and you automate this process as well. You both have your checking accounts once a month. XYZ dollars goes into that bucket, and there's enough money going into that joint bucket that covers all the household expenses. And then the money that's left over in your individual accounts, you have a conversation about how should those accounts be handled. More often than not, like each person has their own money and spends it in their own way.
Right.
What that does, it scratches both itches, right? One is you have this responsibility to each other, to this relationship, to this family unit. And we're both going to contribute our dollars to it into this joint account. It should cover all of those expenses. Maybe the bulk of the money, quite frankly, most of the time, the bulk of the money does go to that joint account.
Right.
But nobody really wants the other party to tell them how to live their life and spend their own money, or even spend the family's money, so to speak. And so when you have your own checking account that you can spend without having to worry about the other party checking in on it, it maintains your sense of independence. You can control how you spend the dollars. And if you blow through your money too fast, then it's going to foster a conversation about, hey, what's going on here? And that's a lot of what doesn't happen in relationships is they don't have conversations around money.
Right.
And then things fester and or some things go wrong and nobody knows about it until it's a major problem. And somebody takes out a credit card and runs up $20,000 in credit card debt. And then you find out later because there wasn't a mechanism to foster some conversation. So I think that, but either way can work. And if you each have your own individual accounts and you agree to pay certain bills, but structurally, it seems to make the most sense if you're going to do something that, like, what, you only have one mortgage payment.
Yeah.
So you're probably not both going to make half a mortgage payment. So funnel those dollars into a joint account, have all those household responsibilities come out of that account, and then maintain your own sense of financial independence and control by having your own money, in your own bucket.
What's your take on using credit cards to pay almost every bill that's allowable for a credit card, and then keeping your money kind of like set aside and then just paying off the credit card, as opposed to using your debit cards for everything? What's your take on that kind of way to manage expenses, like the trivial monthly expenses to everything but the mortgage that you could probably pay with the credit card?
Right. In general, I like it if not overspend. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you find that you're spending, well, if you're not paying it off in full every month, no, you have to pay that thing off in full every month. So assuming that's the case, I think it's a great way to, if you ever want to go back and look at what you're spending your money on, you have a record right there, right? It shows up on your credit card statement every single month. You can even go to the websites of these credit card companies and download it into a spreadsheet, all of the spending. So it's really effective for going back and saying, where am I spending my money? Well, if you really are curious about that and you put it all on the credit cards, you'll have a record that you don't have to work very hard for, and to get that information. The downside, again, like I said, is that it's easier to spend money on a credit card than it is when you use real cold hard cash.
Right.
So if you put a credit card in someone's pocket, and if you put cash in their pocket, they would spend the credit. They would run up the credit much faster. In general, not everybody's the same, but in general, that's the case. But I like the idea. I think it is simple and efficient, and there's a lot of benefits. Yeah,
that's the issue. Yeah, I mean, that's something that, in my opinion, that we worked on ourselves. It's worked for us. Obviously, you have to be ruthless about not using cash and credit at the same time, and not having cash available to actually pay that off. But there's a lot of news stories that usually like once a year, like around open enrollment time across the country, when the retirement stories come up on the news, where they're talking about how much you have to retirement, and it's always the same overlay on the TV screen that says 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, how much you should have in this decade of your life. I am in my fourth decade plus of life myself, and that number for people tends to scare them. I'm assuming women in particular who devoted their lives to being stay-at-home moms, maybe, and their spouse has worked and provided financially. How should the public generally think about those, have this amount of money saved by this age? Like, how should they kind of digest that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say they're not meaningful. On an individual basis, I don't think they're very meaningful, because each person has their own definition of what retirement is. Mm-hmm. And they have their own definition or their own level of spending that defines what their needs are.
Right.
And so, and I get why they put them out. I mean, it's better, I guess, to have something in general to shoot for, like, hey, here, if you're at 20, you should have this, and 30 at this. It gives you some idea, but in reality, in a practical reality, it doesn't really work. Because if somebody spends, again, I'm not talking about how much money they make. People mistake that how much money you make. If you make a lot of money, that you need to have a lot of money in retirement. But if you make a lot of money and you're a big saver, and you're not spending that much money, you may not need a lot of money in retirement, because your spending level drives how much money you need to fund retirement. So if I'm a person, if you're 40 years old and you spend $50,000 a year, maybe you make 80,000, but you spend 50 to live your life, that person's, the amount of money that person needs in their investment accounts is going to be very different than somebody who's spending $80,000 a year. You're 40 years old, you're both 40, one is spending 50, the other is spending 80. That person who's spending 80,000 spending 60% more money than the one making 50. right? It's a huge difference. And so a generic number that gets put forth that says, oh, you should have, $260,000 when you're 40. I mean, maybe for the person that could make sense for the person who's spending 50, but the person who's spending 80, it's probably nowhere close.
Right.
So it's not great, because what we want in society is an answer, a quick, simple, easy answer that I can go take action on. Mm-hmm. So if I'm at 250, it doesn't take any work. I look at my account, I have 320,000, I'm 40. And if this metric says 250, I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing pretty good. But you could be fooling yourself or mistakenly thinking you're doing fine, but your real retirement goal requires you to have $500,000 at that point, because your lifestyle is greater than the average person, or whatever metric they use to build it out. So it's not an easy answer, because it's not an easy answer for people to calculate on their own, to figure out how much money does someone need to retire at a certain age. Requires to do it right, a real detailed analysis and a real understanding of how that works. And usually that resides largely in the hands of financial professionals. There are some tools out there, some money calculators that you can try and use. I would rather somebody do that instead of looking at some statistic, some infographic on Instagram that says, here's where you should be. I would take that a step further. I would probably type in some generic, like financial retirement calculator. And then it's going to ask you to plug in some of your own personal data, your own personal information. How much money do you make? What age you want to retire? Do you get Social Security? And then it's going to give you a much, much better answer for you in your specific situation.
Yeah. I want to, there's two things, you specialize in like women in finance, and I wanted to bring, I want to show you a couple things, because I want to dig a little deep here, because I think this is going to actually make a little bit of sense. So let me do that. Let me show you this first. So this is from Pew Research right here. Women are outpacing men in college completion, including every major racial and ethnic group. And then when you go down and actually see the data associated with that, women are 10 percentage points between the ages of 25 and 34 to have completed college and have their degree. Here's the reason why I'm bringing this up, and you probably already got it. Because what this tells me, in a financial sense about women, is that they have more college debt than men. Based off of completion of degrees, the amount of them engaged in schools, they significantly outpace men when it comes to engaging in university, and have done so for a long time, specifically in this country. So how does that inform some of the choices of the women that you've seen and having to deal with budget issues as well? And before you actually answer that, actually, let me just kind of make it more complicated, because why not? Single women, particularly, own 2.72 million more homes than single men, and the gap is growing. I don't need to know what Yahoo Finance thinks about what this means, because I have you here. But women have these mortgages, and they have, of course, significantly more student loans. So that is a contributory factor to women's finances in this country. It just is. What do you tell women that are watching this?
Well, whether you're a man or a woman, I think the financials behind it are the same. So when you go to college, it's the decision. When you go to college, of course, the intention is to be able to get the skills and get the credentials to be able to go out into the workforce and to make a living, right? To be able to put yourself in the best possible position to go out and fend for yourself, have the financial resources, and to do the things that you want to do in your life. But there's a cost to college. And of course, the school that you go to, the degree that you major in matters. And so anyone really going to college needs to understand that this is a financial decision as well. It's like an investment. I'm investing in myself, and I need to be able to calculate what the return on investment is.
Mhm.
And so one is going to be, well, am I going into debt to do this? And if I'm going into debt, fair enough. Am I going to be able to make enough in the chosen profession to pay that debt back? Now, I don't have the statistics around the average debt of a woman versus a man. I think it's reasonable to extrapolate on average that if there are more women going to college than men, this is an extrapolation at best.
Sure.
Chances are that more women by numbers are going to have more in college debt because there's just a lot more women who are graduating from college. And that's totally fine to an extent, right? Again, if you go to school and you come out with a degree that can pay for that debt and then some, it's really not a problem. Yeah. Even if it's a large number, and obviously a smaller number is better. But what I don't think is happening, or I don't think is happening enough, and again, this is not a male-female thing, is that there's not enough of this calculation of, okay, my expectation is I'm going to come out of college. I'm going to have $30,000 in undergrad debt. I'm going to work as a civil engineer. I think I'll make $80,000 a year out of school. And then therefore you do the math and you say, it'll be pretty easy for me to service that debt, to make the monthly debt payment and then some, so that doesn't become a burden on my life. Conversely, if I come out with $30,000 in debt and I expect to make $42,000 a year, well, that's a huge different calculus, right? Like I may not be able to adequately service that debt on a $42,000 a year salary. So then what ends up happening is that I'm going to have to either defer those loans or make small payments on them. And I feel like I'm trapped by this student loan debt. Then I think we blame the debt, but we don't really go back and say, well, did I really think this through carefully enough? And I'm not criticizing that per se. I think it's really hard for young people. You're 18 years old. I mean, I had this conversation with the client today. She's talking about her daughters thinking about college, doesn't really know what she wants to do, right? Do most people know exactly who they want to be at 18?
Right.
No, they don't, right? But you have to make these big decisions and these big financial decisions. Mm-hmm. So it is a challenge, right? So if you come out of school with debt, and maybe women are more predisposed to or have to deal with this issue more readily than men do because they're going to college at a greater clip. So right. It's an issue that is more prevalent for women than it is for men. And I think that's entirely true. And if you're going to go on for post-secondary degrees, you just take that a step further because those cost even more. Home ownership's the same way. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. I'm taking on this debt. It's a long-term debt. So once I make that one decision, I'm tethered to it for 30 years in many cases for a home. And in college, it could be 10, 20 years, depending upon the payback period. And that has a cascading effect on everything you do thereafter. Because now you come out of college, I have my student loan debt. If you went out and bought a home right away, then you have that mortgage to pay. And a lot of people go out and buy cars right away out of college. And that's you touched on actually the big three. I talk about the big three decisions that people have to make: college, cars, homes. Yeah. And because you make that decision one time and you can be stuck for literally decades behind the curve because your money can't support it. And then to extricate yourself from those things, there's no easy way to extricate yourself from it without blowing up your credit. And in the case of student loans, there's almost no recourse because you can't use bankruptcy as a way to get out of student loans. So it's a real problem to a certain extent, but it's something that requires careful consideration when you take on those types of debts. It can't just be, I'm going to school, I'm doing a good thing, I'm going to educate myself. You really need to think about it more like an investment.
As a side note to this, what I find interesting is that, people concern themselves with the quote elite universities. Like there's all this conversation about the elite universities, but only like 1%, 2% of all students get into those universities anyways. And so for the general public having this conversation, it seems like a really stupid conversation for the general public to be having, given the amount of people who actually get in. It seems to me that if you're not trying to specialize in something specific that requires institutional gravitas to be behind your degree that you get at university. There are so many more affordable programs than there have been for at least a decade that people can engage in and get a degree, where the quality of the learning is high enough to get your degree, where typically the professional experience is what kind of gives you the master's education and what you need to do anyway, kind of once you get into the field. I just don't understand why people don't take advantage of so many of the more cost-effective universities. With, it's like, for example, if I wanted to be a Harvard MBA, to gain, the relationships that come with that designation, or go to Harvard Law to gain the relationships that come with that designation, versus just being a lawyer that practices in a different area where I don't necessarily need those relationships. Why not just choose a school that's, $40,000 cheaper and pursue that? I think part of your point about planning is just like kind of biting the bullet and saying, hey, look, I can go to a college that's maybe a couple of steps down. I don't need to get into like this university at this particular level, when the result is going to be, I'm going to probably end up at the same place that I would end up in anyways, because I've attained that specific credential that is required to get that job.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there's too much focus on the name of the school than what the really quality of the education is, or the necessity of that. People get wrapped up in the name. They do. There's no question about it. And especially if you have a smart kid, this is
right.
where it really, if your kid's of average intelligence or average will, right? Because it's not just about intelligence, but your actually willingness to do the work. But it's those kids who are smart, who are dedicated, and then they're all looking at these Ivy League schools, these prestigious schools, and it becomes, sometimes we see that if they don't go after those schools, they feel like they're letting themselves down, or they're settling for less. And it's a standard that is really not realistic, to your point. I mean, the number of people, the percentage of applicants that get into those schools is extremely small.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a true meritocracy, right? Name recognition matters. I'm sure the big wigs at big corporations, and we all know this in what do you call it? I forget the name of it, but like if you have your political connections, right? They're getting
legacy admissions.
Legacy, thank you so much. Legacy admissions, right? So you put all this pressure to go to these schools, and when you look at the statistics thereafter and say who really is doing well in their careers and in their jobs, they don't all come from those Ivy League schools. Now, granted, maybe some small narrow band. If you want to be a Supreme Court justice, or you want to be a judge, you might need to go to one of those schools,
right?
Or the propensity is for those schools. But for most people, let's talk 99.5% of us, it's not necessary to go do that. And there shouldn't be any sense of like, I'm letting myself down, or I'm embarrassed, or I'm underperforming if you choose a school that's not on that tier. It really is what you make of it. And I've seen this, we work with a lot of clients on a lot of different levels, and we know their backgrounds. And I mean, you see just as many people making, large sums of money who never went to college in some cases, or went to your average state school doing just fine. And then right alongside them might be a Harvard grad who's doing just fine themselves, but it wasn't like, oh, if you went to this state school, you were definitely not going to be as successful as someone else.
Right.
And so I just think we place a lot of pressure on ourselves. I think parents place pressure on their kids. And I don't know how you get around that, because that's an ego thing. It's a social comparison thing, and that's human nature for us to do these social comparisons. But I think if you dug into the raw data, which is nobody does it, no one wants to do that, dig into the raw data. But the data suggests, and as I say this all the time to my clients, it's like, this isn't my opinion. What I'm about to tell you isn't my opinion. The data suggests this.
Right.
And therefore, we're going to go with what the data suggests. Not what Ed thinks or what Ed's opinion is. We're going to go with what the data suggests. And more often than not, that's the best way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great encouraging point, specifically for, a woman who's like looking for advice from, from your institution, um, because generally speaking, financial planning, wealth building, wealth generation is strategic. It's decisions that were made previously that are bearing fruit now because there was a bit of planning in between, and recognizing that there might be more high risk situations that you put yourself in that might pose a problem to some aspects of you in the future, and just kind of preparing yourself for that. So Ed, how can some of the women who are watching us have this conversation today get a hold of you if they're interested in scheduling a consultation to learning more about how they can kind of protect themselves, build for the future, not become stigmatized by how women view finances now in the kind of the ecosystem? How can they kind of reach out to you and kind of engage?
Yeah, the best place to go is to our sister company called enlightenher.com. We've built that platform for sort of big tent for all women. So our wealth management business is more narrowly focused. Enlighten Her really is about bringing financial education. It's a women's first financial education company. It really is designed to help women. Yeah, this the 12 steps is a great place to start. You grab that resource. It's a wonderful resource. Oh, actually, that's a divorce piece. Excuse me. We do a lot of work in the divorce space.
Right.
But the starting over guides, the starting out guide really is it's a free resource. It's for women who are just starting out, like someone coming out of college, right? Who's just saying, like, I want to be smart about my money. I'm engaged, but I don't really know what to do. That starting out guide is a great resource. If you're a woman who's starting over, maybe you've gone through divorce, you're widowed, or you're just getting started a little bit later in life, that starting over course or guide is built for you there. But there's a lot of resources on the site. We would encourage you to engage with the site. It's a site built for women, for the how women think about money. And again, women think about money very differently. I think you'll find as a woman, if you go to our site, this particular site or a site like it, which is built for women, it does land very differently than a traditional financial advisor or traditional financial services site, which tends to be built more for how men think about money. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's just different. And it's just a great place to go and get resources. And most of those resources are, the right price. They're free.
That's a great price.
Yeah.
I will link I will link the website in the description to this podcast so that you can go and check it out. So you won't have to worry about that. Yeah. So Ed, any last words of encouragement, direction or focus, or suggestions on how women can start framing their mentality to kind of ensure that they are ready for retirement, that they're just financially secure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about women in money, and if I could just instill one thing for women, is don't think about learning about money as a nice to do. Think of it as a must do. Think of it as a survival skill. It's not okay to just delegate the control or the management of your money to somebody else without you being involved. It doesn't mean you need to be 50% involved. Doesn't mean you need to be 100% involved. You just can't be absent at the wheel. And what we find is when women do engage with money, when they are present, they feel better, they feel more confident, they're capable. So there's no reason fundamentally why women can't engage with money in a much more meaningful way, productive way, positive way, and have a good, positive relationship with money, because we all have a relationship with money. But you just have to take that first step. Don't avoid it. Figure it out, even if you don't like it. I hear this all the time. Like, I just don't like it. I just nails on a chalkboard. Fair enough. But if you engage just enough with it, I think you'll find that it's worthwhile.
Right. It doesn't have to be painful.
No, absolutely not.
Just organized, but not painful. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Ultimately, it is empowering when you come out and when you engage with your money in the right way. You do get a much greater sense of confidence. You have a much greater sense of like control in your direction in life, because ultimately women want their money. They don't care about, in general, they don't care about having the most money or earning high rates of return, those types of things. Those aren't their primary motivations. Primary motivations are, can I help my daughter go to college? Can I have the life that I want, the work-life balance to where I can have a good life, take care of the people around me? And when you have enough money to do that, you do have that sense of confidence versus that fear factor that I'm going to die a bag lady. I'm going to have to work forever. I'm never going to be able to do the things I want in my life. If you engage with your money in the right way, you can dispel those myths and move forward.
Awesome. Ed Vargo, thank you for taking the time, spending it with me today and helping to encourage our female entrepreneurs, small business owners, and viewers and listeners to engage with their finances, not be afraid of them, take the bull by the horns, and find comfort within the spaces, and give them a roadmap. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Every guest I have in, including Ed, I bring in because this is called the Common Sense Show. Now, it may not always be common sense to you, but common sense is important because it just requires, the reason why I call it common sense is not to be reductionist, not to be simplistic, but really common sense is about taking practical steps, things that you can implement today to kind of really change the game in your life or in your business. So Ed has presented to us some wonderful ideas about how you can do that. Frame your mentality to start and then execute. So for Ed, I'm Micah. Thank you for listening or watching, and we're out of here. Take care.